Labyrinth, a novel based on the Jim Henson film by ACH Smith, read by Rose in the library. Chapter 9. Another door opens. Sarah walked past the hanging tree. Ludo, wincing with the soreness of his nipped body, followed. Behind the tree, two high doorways had appeared, set into a stone wall that seemed to be part of a rough forest hedge. On each door was an iron knocker. "Well, look at these," she remarked, glad to have a companion again. It was more fun than talking to herself. They approached the doorways and looked more closely at the knockers. Each had the form of a repulsive face, with a ring set in it. The knocker to her left had the ring coming out of his ears. The one on the right held the ring in its mouth. She looked from one to the other. Which to choose? She always found choices hard to make. If there were two kinds of cake at a birthday party, she would contrive to have a bit of each, at a decent interval, naturally, and hoping that no one noticed. Now she looked around the glade to see if there was some other way past this wall. There wasn't, and so she examined the knockers. "Well, Ludo," she asked, "which one of these two ugly characters shall we choose?" "It's very rude to stare," said the first knocker, the one with the ring set in its ears. Sarah jumped, still not accustomed to the habit that normally inarticulate things had in the labyrinth of speaking their minds. "I'm sorry," she said, though she felt that she was scarcely to blame for assuming that a door knocker would have no mind to speak, let alone blunt opinions on acceptable social behavior. "I was just wondering which door to choose, that's all." "What?" the first knocker asked. Sarah was about to reply that, where she came from, to say "what" was thought just as rude as staring. But before she could open her mouth, she heard a mumbling noise from behind her. It was the second knocker, with a ring in his mouth. It said something like, "Mm-hmm. Don't talk with your mouth full," the first knocker said primly. "Mm-hmm." Sarah addressed the second knocker. "I don't understand what you're saying." Then she realized what the problem was. "Oh," she said. "Wait a moment." "What was that?" the first knocker inquired. Sarah took hold of the ring in the second knocker's mouth and pulled. It came away easily. The face looked tremendously relieved. It exercised the muscles around its jaw and chin with evident pleasure. "It's so good to get that thing out," it sighed. "What were you saying?" Sarah asked. The first knocker behind her said, "Huh?" The second knocker nodded at the first. "I said it's no good talking to him. Oh, dear me, no. He's deaf as a post, that one, I can tell you." The first knocker said, "Mumble, mumble, mumble, that's you. You're a wonderful conversational companion, I must say." "You should talk," the second knocker yelled back. "All you do is moan." "It's no good," the first knocker said in a matter-of-fact voice. "Can't hear you." Sarah looked at the second knocker. "Where do these doors lead?" she asked it. "What?" asked the first knocker. "Search me," the second one asked her. "We're just the knockers." "Oh," Sarah said, reflecting that she ought to have known better than to expect a simple answer. Well, she had to try one door or the other. She chose the second one. Having engaged in discourse with it, however slightly, She felt it would somehow have been discourteous to turn her back and choose its neighbor. On the other hand, it could be that the knockers would prefer their doors not to be opened. She shouldn't take it for granted that the knockers would like people to make use of them. Every either had its or. If she weighed the implications of every alternative, would she ever get to make a choice at all? When one door opens, so does another one. She had committed herself to the second door by now, with her hands against it, so she went ahead and pushed. It didn't budge. She pushed harder. She leaned her shoulder against the door. It was as solid as the wall it was set in. She thought of asking Ludo to help her. His gigantic bulk would surely open the door. But she wasn't sure it was the right door to choose, and so, instead, she asked another question. "How do we get through?" "Huh?" said the first knocker. The second one, with an arch smile, replied, "Knock, and the door will open." Ah. She looked at the ring she held, and went to put it back in the second knocker's mouth. He made a face. I don't want that thing back in my mouth." And he clamped his lips tightly shut, and refused to open them even when she put the ring against his mouth. "Oh, come on," Sarah said encouragingly. "I want to knock." He shook his head stubbornly. Commented the first knocker, morosely as usual. "Doesn't want the ring back in his mouth. Can't say as a blamin'." "Then," Sarah said, putting down the ring, "I'm afraid I'll have to bother you instead." She walked over to the first knocker and took hold of its ring. "Ow! Oh!" the first knocker protested. Sarah took no notice. She knocked twice upon the heavy door. It swung open. Cautiously, she put her head through the doorway to see what was beyond. She heard giggles, splutters of suppressed laughter, honks and hoots. Instinctively, she started to grin herself and went farther through the doorway. She turned, waiting for Ludo to follow her. He remained in the doorway, shaking his head. "Come on, Ludo." He shook his head again. Well, she thought, it can't do any harm to see where this might lead. She would come back for Ludo if she spotted the castle. She was in a sunlit forest, with clumps and banks of flowers, daisy-decked hillocks, dingles and dells, shady trees all around. The laughter was infectious. Giggling, she looked hard for the creatures who were enjoying all this merriment. All she could see were the forest plants. "Who is it?" she called out, chuckling. From right behind her came a laughing snort. She spun around and saw a tree's branch moving to cover a hollow in its trunk that just might have been its mouth. "It was the tree," she declared. "Tree, wasn't it you?" That sparked off a tinkle of giggles at her feet. She looked down and saw a cluster of bluebells shivering and shaking together with amusement. "Oh, look!" she exclaimed, falling to her knees and giggling with them. They were beside themselves with hilarity now. The tree above her could hold it in no longer. It exploded in a bellow of mirth. Sarah threw her head back and joined in. It was the signal for a general outburst. A tree stump nearby was laughing in a deep, cracked voice. Birds on a branch were hopping and cackling. Another tree was rocking. Ferns waved about. Squirrels and mice peeped from their holes with tears in their eyes. Sarah was helpless with laughing. Catching a breath, she panted, "What are we laughing at?" "I don't know," the tree above her roared. The whole forest shook. Even the grass on the ground was trembling. Sarah was feeling faint. She sat down. Oh, please, please, I must stop. She clutched her sides. In response, the laughter around her redoubled. It reached a pitch of hysterical shrillness. I've never laughed so much in my life, Sarah gasped, flat on her back. Birds, convulsed with mirth, fell out of the trees and hit the ground head first. She saw their eyes were mad, with pinprick pupils. Other creatures came screaming from under the roots of the trees, and as they approached her, she managed to sit up, alarmed by their sinister gaping mouths and crazy eyes. Still laughing, she moaned, Oh, please, please, I must stop. She can't stop, the tree howled, and the whole forest screeched in reply. She got to her feet. Her body and mouth were shaking uncontrollably, but her eyes were haggard. Stop, she whispered. Stop. She staggered back toward the open doorway and collapsed. Shrieking hysteria applauded that. She raised her head. She could see Ludo just outside the door and held up her hand for help. He looked very uneasy and wouldn't come inside the door, but he held his arm out towards her and nodded his great head in encouragement. Her eyes fixed on him, she dragged herself across the last 2 yards until he could bend down, pick her up, take her outside, and shut the door. The laughter stopped dead. The breeze in the leaves of the maze outside was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard.